I had been lied to by the finest liars in 3 counties, and not one of them ever unsettled me. Ambassadors who smiled while they cut you, card sharps with saints' faces and a queen up each sleeve, mothers who hawked their daughters across a ballroom the way a fishwife hawks the morning catch, and thought I could not hear the price behind every compliment. I read them all the way a farmer reads the sky, the tightening at the corner of a mouth, the half-beat too long before an answer, the smile that reached the lips and stopped there, going no further. I was never once caught in the rain. It was said of me across the north that the Duke of Harrowgate could not be deceived, and it was very nearly true. I had made it true. It had cost me a great deal to make it true, though I did not yet understand the size of the bill. So when the woman who called herself Miss Verena Ashford curtsied to me in my own entrance hall, and told me she was a distant cousin come down from the far north to pay her respects, I knew inside the space of a single breath that every word of it was false. What I did not know, what I could not have guessed, standing there in the candlelight with the rain ticking against the tall windows, was why I chose to say nothing. She was slight, and plainly dressed in a gray traveling gown that had been let out at the seams more than once and turned at the cuffs to hide the wear. Her boots were good but old, mended cleverly at the heel. All of this I saw in the time it takes most men to say good evening, and all of it told a story of respectable poverty, which was precisely the story she wished it to tell. But it was not her clothes that gave her away. It was her stillness. Honest people fidget. They cannot help it. They touch their hair, they glance toward the door, they turn a ring on a finger, they let their hands say all the small, anxious things their mouths are too well bred to speak. This woman did none of it. She stood in my hall with her hands folded and her spine straight and a serene, sorrowful smile arranged upon her face, and she did not fidget at all, and that, to a man who had made a study of it, was as loud as a scream. The fidget had been trained out of her. And a fidget is trained out of a person by only 2 things in this world, the stage or the confidence trick. She had not the look of an actress. That left the other. Her eyes went once around the hall, a single unhurried sweep, and I watched her take her inventory. The silver on the long table, the 2 Van Dyck portraits and the one that only looked like a Van Dyck, the height of the windows and more particularly the depth of the window locks, the number of footmen and where each one stood. She did it in perhaps 2 seconds, the way you or I might glance at a clock, and then her gaze came back to my face wearing a warmth she had manufactured on the spot, warm as a hearth and about as real as a painted fire. I had watched 100 fortune hunters do a clumsier version of that same swift arithmetic across a supper table. Not one of them had ever done it half so well. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even with a burr of the north in it that was, I would later learn, the only true thing she gave me that whole first night. "You are far kinder to receive me than I deserve. I know how strange it must be, a stranger arriving on your doorstep out of the dark, claiming a share of your blood." "That remains to be seen," I said. I watched the small flicker go through her, there and gone, a candle in a draught as she turned the words over, hunting for the trap in them, wondering whether I meant anything at all by that remains to be seen or whether it was only a great man's idle courtesy. She decided correctly that she could not yet tell. She inclined her head as though I had said something gracious. My steward Barlow had received her letter a week before. I had read it myself that evening after she was shown up to her room, read it twice, and admired it the way one admires fine work in any trade one happens to understand. It was a forgery, of course, a careful, patient, expensive forgery. It invoked a real Greytan, a Mrs. Ashford who had indeed existed, and had indeed married into a northern branch of my mother's people, dead now these 15 years and buried too far away for anyone to trouble asking. It laid out a genealogy just tangled enough that a man would grow bored tracing it before he grew suspicious, and it did the one thing every good forgery does, which is to give the reader a small, flattering reason to want it to be true. In this case the reason was that I was lonely, though the letter could not have known that, or perhaps it could. Perhaps she had known it before ever she set foot in my county. She had studied me. That, in the end, was what stayed my tongue that first night, not her cleverness, though she was clever, but the sheer, devoted thoroughness of the study. A woman does not learn a man that completely, down to the ache he keeps hidden even from his own household, unless her entire living depends upon getting him exactly right. I gave her a room in the East Wing, and I told Barlow, quietly, to count the plate each night and say nothing. Let me tell you what they called me, so that you understand the man she walked in upon. The Iron-Eyed Duke. I never chose the name, and I never troubled to refuse it because it was useful and because it was earned. It meant a man who could not be gulled, could not be flattered, could not be sold a horse with a bad leg or an alliance with a rotten heart. It meant safety. But every name that keeps the world at a distance keeps it at that distance in every direction at once, and the iron that turned away the liars turned away the rest of them too, the honest, the kind, the ones who might have loved me if I had let a single one of them close enough to try. I had not noticed this for a long while. A man stops hearing the clock he has lived beside for years. He only notices the silence when at last it stops. I had not always been iron. That is the part that matters, and the part I have told almost no one. There had been, years before, a woman named Lady Sybil, all silver laughter and borrowed sentiment, and a way of looking at a man as though he were the only lit window in a dark street. She made me believe, across the length of one perfect summer, that she loved me. Not my dukedom, me. And I believed her, wholly and gladly, the way a drowning man believes in the rope, because I wanted to. Because the wanting was so strong it drowned the small, quiet voice that had already, even then, begun to notice the half-beat too long before her sweetest words. She married my nearest friend's fortune the week my father died, while my back was turned to grief, and she did it laughing, and I understood only afterward that the whole perfect summer had been a wager she expected to win either way. I never forgave her, but that is not quite the truth, and I have promised myself in the telling of this to speak the truth. What I never forgave was not Sybil. It was the wanting. It was the part of myself that had looked at a lie, and because it was a beautiful lie and I was lonely, had chosen to call it love. So I killed that part. I studied every tell the human body makes when the mouth departs from the truth, and I built the iron precisely over the place where the wanting had been, and I swore I would never again be wanted into blindness by anyone. It kept me safe for years. It kept me, I understand now, in a solitude so complete I had mistaken it for peace. And now there was a thief asleep in my east wing, and I lay awake in the dark feeling something I had not felt in longer than I could name. It was not desire. Not yet, not that plainly. It was interest. The clean, bright, almost forgotten interest of a man who has spent his whole life the only master of his craft in the room, suddenly, unmistakably, in the presence of another. The second night I set a trap for her at dinner, because I could not help myself, and because I wanted to see her work again. We dined at the small table in the winter parlor, just the two of us and the fire and Barlow moving quiet at the sideboard, and I spoke fondly, warmly of our supposed shared great-aunt, the real Mrs. Ashford, whom I had of course never met. And then I laid the trap. I gave the old woman a detail I invented whole, out of nothing, watching my false cousin's face the way a fowler watches the reeds. I remember my mother saying, I offered, that Aunt Ashford had a great fondness for a particular hymn, I forget which, and that she used to press violets flat inside her prayer book, so many that the pages would hardly close. None of it was true. There was no hymn, no prayer book, no violet. It was a clean invention, a stick thrown into the water to see whether the fish would rise. An honest cousin would have said gently that she was sorry. She did not recall it, for how could she, being no true relation at all? A clumsy liar would have leapt upon it, agreed too fast and too fully, embroidered it into a tapestry to prove her belonging. Miss Ashford did neither. She tilted her head a little, and let a shadow of soft sorrow cross her face, and looked for a moment into the middle distance as though at something dear and far away. She pressed them so thin, she said quietly, that you could hold a page up to a candle and see the light come straight through the petals, like little stained glass windows all down the Psalms. She glanced up at me and gave a small, sad, private smile. I always loved that about her prayer book. I had forgotten it until you spoke. And she looked back down at her plate as though the memory grieved her too much to hold. I very nearly laughed aloud, and it was not scorn that pulled the laugh up in me, it was admiration, pure and helpless. She had taken my invention, my empty stick thrown in the water, and built a whole lit room onto it, furnished it, hung the light in the windows. She had not merely accepted the lie. She had improved it, made it more beautiful than I had made it, and handed it back to me so gracefully that a lesser man would have wept over a greytant who had never in the history of the world existed. I refilled her wine to cover my face, and I thought, with something close to wonder, I have never in all my life met anyone so quick. I ought, of course, to have had her put out at the gate that same hour. That is what the iron-eyed Duke of the stories would have done, exposed her coldly, precisely, enjoyed the neat click of the trap, sent her walking down the drive in the rain with a warning ringing in her ears. And I did not do it. I have asked myself 100 times since why not, and the answer, when I am honest, is this: I was so tired of neatness. Every soul in my acquaintance lied to me too. They only did it more slowly and with far worse craft. They flattered and they angled and they calculated behind their bows and their courtesies, and I saw the whole of it always, every time, and it wearied me to the very marrow. This woman lied for her bread, plainly, beautifully, with a skill so far above the fumbling deceits of my drawing-room acquaintance that there was something almost restful in it, the rest a craftsman feels, walking through a fair full of shoddy goods, at the sudden sight of one perfect thing. At least her deception was honest about being deception. At least she was very, very good at it. And I was so weary of being lied to badly that being lied to well felt, God help me, like being seen. And there was the other matter, the one pressing on my house from the outside, which is what turned my idle, dangerous interest into a scheme of my own. Her name was Lady Marguerite Vane, and her uncle was Sir Holly's Vane, and between the two of them they had decided, some months past, that I would marry Marguerite whether I willed it or no. It had begun, as these things do, as a suggestion, a warm word here, a seating arrangement there. It had hardened over the season into something much closer to a siege. The engine of it was debt. Old obligations of my late father's, contracted in his final careless years, nothing ruinous on its own but real and secured against Harrowgate land. I had been redeeming them steadily, patiently, clearing my father's ledger a line at a time. And Sir Holly's Vane, I had come to understand only slowly, had been buying those obligations up from their holders faster than I could clear them. He did not want the money. He was already rich. He wanted his niece a duchess and my ancient estate as a lever in his soft, patient hands, and he had arranged his affairs so that a plain refusal would cost me a great sum all at once, and a public slight to Marguerite would cost me more, for he would make certain the world heard that Harrowgate had led a virtuous young woman on and then cast her aside. He was coming to Harrowgate at the week's end, niece in tow, expecting an understanding, and I had no counter to him. You cannot fight a siege with iron eyes alone. Iron eyes tell you the wall is coming down. They do not hold it up. Unless, I thought, lying awake again in the dark of the second night, listening to the old house settle, unless a man happened to have, asleep in his east wing, a woman who could invent a dead grey-tant's violets on the strength of a single thrown stick, and make the invention lovelier than the truth. I went to her the third night, and I found her exactly where an honest cousin would have had no reason on earth to be. The long gallery ran the whole north length of the house, hung with 2 centuries of Harrowgates, and it was there I found her late, well past when the household had gone up, standing before the portraits with a candle in her hand and a look in her eye that had nothing of grief in it and everything of the prybar. She was not admiring her ancestors. She was measuring the frames, weighing them, reading the wall for it seems the way I read a face for its lies, taking the true inventory now that she believed herself unwatched. which canvas came off its hook easiest, which frame was gilt over plaster, and which over something worth the carrying, where the old silver was kept, and how a small, strong person might get it down a dark stair and out a window before the house woke. She heard my step. To her very great credit, she did not startle. I have startled hard men in that gallery merely by clearing my throat. She did not so much as flinch. She simply turned, unhurried, and I watched her whole body rearrange itself between one breath and the next, the prybar look folding itself away, the shoulders softening, the grieving cousin rising up over the thief like water closing over a stone. By the time she faced me full, she was innocence itself, a lonely young woman communing with her forebears by candlelight. "They are very fine, your grace," she said, with a wistful little gesture at the portraits. "I could not sleep. I hope I have not trespassed." I looked at her for a long moment, and then I set it down, the game, the courtesy, all of it, and I told her the truth, because I had decided, somewhere in the last 3 days, that I would rather she knew me for a man who saw her clearly than played her for a fool who did not. "You are not my cousin," I said. "Your great-aunt Ashford, whom you grieved so beautifully at my table last night, is a fiction. Your name is not Verena Ashford, and you did not come to Harrowgate to pay your respects. You came to rob me." I have turned that moment over more times than I can count in the years since, because it was the first time I ever saw her true face, the real one, beneath all the others, and it has never left me. Lasted less than a second. Everything she had so carefully built, the softness, the wistfulness, the sleepless grieving cousin, fell away all at once, cleanly, the way a dust sheet is pulled from furniture in a single motion. And beneath it stood a woman braced and swift and utterly unsurprised. A woman who had been caught before, more than once, and had lived through it, and was already, I could see it move behind her steady eyes, already counting the exits, the windows, the distance to the door, the odds. It was not fear, quite. It was calculation running very fast under great pressure, and it was, in its own hard way, one of the most impressive things I have ever watched a human being do. And then she made a choice I did not expect. She did not run for the door. She did not fall to her knees and weep a fresh performance of innocence, which is what 9 in 10 would have done and what I was braced to disbelieve. She looked at me steadily, and she let the mask stay down. "How long have you known?" she asked. And her voice had changed with her face, flatter now, quicker, the north in it fully real and no longer a garnish, the voice of the woman and not of any of her parts. "Since the front step," I said. She took that in. I watched her recalculate everything, 3 days of careful work reassessed in an instant, every warm word I had given her re-examined in this new and colder light. "Then you're one of two things," she said slowly. "You're cruel or you want something, and cruel men don't wait 3 days to spring it. Cruel men enjoy the springing. They'd have done it the first night for the pleasure of my face." Her chin came up. Her eyes did not leave mine. "So, you're the other kind. What do you want, your grace?" And standing there in the guttering candlelight, in the long cold gallery under 200 years of my painted forebears, I understood something that turned the whole course of my life. I had at last met a person who saw me as clearly as I had spent my whole life seeing everyone else, who had looked past the dukedom and the iron and the reputation, past the trap I had just sprung, and read the man underneath with the same swift certainty I read the world. It was the strangest relief I have ever known. It was like setting down a weight I had carried so long I had forgotten it was a weight at all. "I want to make you an offer," I said. "Sit down, miss. What is your name? Your true one. I'll not bargain with a woman I have to call by a lie." She hesitated over that longer than over anything else that whole strange night, and I understood why. A name is the one thing a person in her trade must never surrender, the one lever that, once given, can never be taken back. She weighed me one last time, and then she chose to trust, a little, provisionally, a single inch of trust extended like a hand into the dark. "Wren," she said at last, "Wren Calloway." "Miss Calloway," I said, and I gestured to the window seat and I sat across from her, and I told her everything. I told her about Sir Holly's vein and the debts my father had left, and how they had been bought up beneath me faster than I could clear them. I told her about Marguerite, paraded toward me all season like a prize heifer at a fair. I told her about the siege, and the week's end, and the understanding that was coming down my own drive in 2 days' time, and how I had no way in the world to refuse it that would not cost me my land or my honor or both. She listened without a word, her whole quick mind bent upon it, and I saw her begin, she could not help it, any more than I could help reading her, to turn the problem over as a professional turns over a lock, looking for the tumblers. And then I told her what I wanted. I need a woman I am plainly, publicly, and convincingly attached to, I said, before Sir Holly's vein sets foot in this house, and intended of my own free choosing, already settled, so that his understanding becomes an impossibility. One cannot press a man toward a match he has already made, and so that he cannot punish me for refusing a woman I was never free to take. It must be flawless. Sir Holly's reads people nearly as well as I do. It is the one thing that makes him dangerous. It must hold for a week before his eyes, under his direct and patient scrutiny at close quarters in my own house. I let that sit a moment between us, and I do not believe there is another soul in England who could do it. I have watched you these 3 days. I think you could do it in your sleep. She stared at me across the little space of the window seat, and for the first time since I had known her 3 days, though it felt already like longer, Wren Calloway looked wholly, honestly astonished. "You want to hire the thief," she said slowly, as though laying each word down to be sure of it, "to play your bride." "I want to hire," I said, "the most gifted liar I have ever met in my life to tell one lie, a single sustained lie, well within her powers, for 1 week, in a good cause, to save a man's land from a patient blackmailer. And in exchange I will not send for the magistrate. I will pay you a sum greater than everything you came into this house intending to steal. And at the week's end, when Sir Holly's has gone away empty-handed, you will walk out of Harrowgate a free woman, with a full purse and no charge standing against your name anywhere in England. You will have committed no theft. You will have earned a fortune, and you will have done it, for once in your life, in a cause that leaves no one the poorer but a man who richly deserves it." For a long moment she said nothing at all. I watched her turn it over and over, hunting the trick in it, the hidden hook, because a woman like Wren Calloway assumes that everything is a trap, having spent her life setting so many of them herself. She examined my offer the way I might examine a smile that reached the lips and went no further. "Why me?" she said at last, and there was something almost wary in it. "You could hire an actress out of any theater in York. You could find some genuinely poor, genuinely respectable cousin, a real one, and coach her. Any pretty, biddable fool who'd take your coin and simper on your arm for a week. Why the thief who came to rob you? Why the one person in the house you've every reason not to trust?" "Because a fool would be caught," I said simply. "Sir Holly's would have her turned inside out by the second dinner, and then I'd be worse off than before, exposed as a man so desperate he'd bought a bride to fend off a match. And because a fool I'd have to explain it to. I'd have to teach her the danger, and she'd never fully believe it, and her fear would show, and her fear would sink us." I leaned forward. "You I don't have to explain a single thing to. You already understand exactly what this is, the stakes, the danger, the craft of it, the cost of a slip. I saw it the moment I laid the offer out. You were solving it before I'd finished speaking. I don't need someone honest, Miss Calloway. Honesty would ruin me here. I need someone who can lie to a very dangerous man flawlessly for 7 days and never once let the seam show. That is not a common gift. It is, so far as I have ever seen, uncommon to the point of being unique. And it happens to be sitting across from me in a stolen candle's light." Something moved across her face then, not the manufactured warmth of the first night at the door, not the poised sorrow of the dinner table, something smaller and far more real that she caught and hid almost before it surfaced, but I had spent 3 days learning her, and I saw it go by. I did not understand it then. I understand it now, and the understanding is one of the treasures of my life. It was the first time in all her years that any living soul had valued her for the one thing she had been taught to be most ashamed of, had looked at her deceit, her single true talent, the thing that had kept her fed and alive, and had also kept her forever outside every warm-lit window she had ever passed, and called it not a sin but a gift, had wanted her, precisely and only, for the thing the whole world had told her made her worthless. She was quiet for a long time. The candle had burned low between us. Somewhere far off in the great sleeping house, a clock told the half hour. 1 week, she said at last. 1 week, I agreed. And she held out her hand to shake on it, held it out plainly, the way men do who are sealing a bargain, not the way a lady offers hers to be bowed over. I took it. Her grip was firm and cool and certain, and neither of us was fool enough to pretend it was anything more than exactly what it was. A bargain struck between two people who trusted each other precisely as far as the written terms and not 1 inch beyond. That is where it began. I will tell you plainly because I have promised you the truth. I believed, sealing that bargain, that I was the one running the scheme, that I was the master here, hearing a clever tool to a clear purpose, and that when the week was done I would pay the tool and open the door and go back, safe and iron-eyed, to my well-defended solitude. I was wrong about that. I was wrong, as it turned out, about very nearly everything, except her. We had 3 days to build a courtship before Sir Holly's vein came down my drive, and Wren Calloway set about building it precisely the way she would have set about any great confidence trick, which is to say with a craft and a foresight that I, who fancied myself the sharpest reader of people in the North, could only stand back and admire. She came to me the morning after our bargain early, before the household was properly stirring, and she had clearly been awake half the night working. There was ink on the side of her hand. She had made a plan. "If we're to do this," she said, without preamble, settling into the chair across my breakfast table and helping herself to my coffee as though we had been conspirators for years, "you'll do exactly as I tell you in the small things, and you'll not argue with me in front of a servant or a guest even when you think I'm wrong. Especially then. Can you do that? Because a great many powerful men cannot. And if you can't, we should stop now, and I'll take a smaller sum for my trouble and be gone before your uncle-in-law-to-be arrives." I was not accustomed to being told what I could and could not do at my own table. I discovered, somewhat to my surprise, that I did not mind it. "I can do that," I said. "We'll see." She sipped my coffee and studied me over the rim with the flat professional gaze I was coming to know, the one that measured a thing for exactly what it was worth. "Here is the first thing you must understand, Your Grace. The lie you're worried about, the grand one, we are betrothed, we love each other, that lie is not where we'll be caught. Grand lies are easy. Anyone can stand up and declare a thing. The place a false attachment dies is in the small carelessnesses, the thousand tiny truths that two people who are genuinely fond of one another let slip without ever meaning to and never think about at all." She set down the cup. "Your Sir Hollies won't be listening to our declarations. He'll be watching our hands, so that's what we build, the hands." "The hands," I repeated. "Where two people stand when they think no one's counting the inches. How you look at me when I'm speaking to someone else. Whether you know, without being told, which side of a room I've walked to. The private glance a fond pair shares over a third person's folly. I make a joke with my eyes at a dull man's expense, and you catch it because we're the sort who share such things." She spread her inky hand flat on the cloth. "None of that can be performed in the moment, not convincingly, not under a hard eye. It has to be built into us beforehand until it's habit, until we do it without thinking. That's the work of the next 3 days, not the declaring, the habit. I have kept a good many wise men in my employ over the years, stewards, lawyers, agents. Not one of them ever taught me anything I could not have reasoned out alone. This workhouse-raised thief, over my own breakfast, was teaching me a thing about the human heart that I, for all my famous iron eyes, had never once seen, that love announces itself not in its declarations but in its unguarded geometry. And she was teaching it to me the way a patient woman teaches a child to walk. And I, who had never in my adult life permitted a single soul to instruct me in anything, sat still and learned. That afternoon she made me walk with her in the south garden, where the gardeners were at their work and would see us and carry the seeing back to the servants' hall, because, as she explained it, the servants must believe it first. A great house runs on its below stairs, she said, taking my arm as we came into view of the men clipping the yew. The servants are the true couriers of everything. Your Sir Hollies, if he's half as clever as you fear, won't spend all his time watching us at dinner. He'll get one of his people talking to one of yours over a pipe in the stable yard, and he'll ask, all idle, whether the Duke and his young lady seem, settled, genuine. And whatever your footman says then, having watched us these 3 days, is worth more to Sir Hollies than anything I could say to his face across your table. So the footman must believe us before he ever arrives. Which means we're playing to the gardeners now. Smile at me. Not like that, God, not like that. You look as though you're identifying a corpse. Like I've just said something that pleases you. You have not said anything that pleases me. You have called my smile a corpse. Then pretend I've said something pleasing. You did buy a professional liar, do try to keep up. But there was a glint in it now, the first I'd seen, a spark of something that was not calculation, and it undid me a little, and my smile, when it came, must have been real, because she blinked and looked away. Better, she said more quietly. That was yes, that. We walked, and as we walked she went on with the lesson, low and steady, correcting me by degrees the way a riding master corrects a seat. You hold yourself, she said, like a man expecting to be attacked from any quarter, shoulders squared, weight back, everything guarded. It's how you stand at everyone, I'd wager it's the iron, it's the whole armor of you, and I don't doubt it served you. But it's wrong for this. A man in love is careless with his body. He forgets to guard, because for once in his life he's beside someone he doesn't need to guard against. Here, and she reached up and took my arm and moved it, arranging me, drawing herself in under it until she stood close against my side, closer than any woman had stood to me in years, close enough that I could smell the plain soap she used and feel the warmth of her through the worn gray wool of her sleeve. There, she said, and looked up at me. Now you're a man walking with a woman, She stopped, because for the space of one long breath I had entirely forgotten that it was a lesson, and so I saw it in her face, had she. We stood there in the garden with the yew clippings scenting the air and the gardeners not 30 feet off, and something passed between us that was in no plan of hers, that had no place in any bargain, and neither of us moved. Then she stepped back, brisk, too brisk, and put a professional inch of distance between us and said, like that, that's the thing. You looked almost human just then. High praise, I said, and my voice was not quite steady. I'm told I'm generous with it. And she turned us back toward the house, and did not take my arm again for the rest of that walk, and I noticed the not taking more than I would have noticed the taking, which I suspect she knew. That night I laughed for the first time in longer than I could remember. It happened in the library, where we had agreed to meet each evening, ostensibly to rehearse our history, our shared inventions, the story we would tell in one voice when Sir Hollies came probing. In truth, I understand now, because neither of us could keep away. She had been describing, with a dry and murderous accuracy, the sort of society mother she'd fleeced in her working life. The vanity of them, the greed dressed up as concern for a daughter's future, the way they'd hand over a fortune in jewels to a plausible stranger sooner than believe a plain, honest word from a poor one. She did an impression of one such woman, a Mrs. Pennifold of Harrowgate, all fluttering handkerchief and predatory simper, and it was so exact, so mercilessly true, that the laugh came up out of me before I could stop it. The real kind, the kind that arrives on its own and shakes a man, the kind I had genuinely believed I had lost the mechanism for somewhere around the summer of Lady Sybil. Wren stopped mid-impression and stared at me as though I had done something remarkable. What? I said. Nothing, I only, she looked oddly at a loss, she who was never at a loss. I didn't think you could, laugh, not like that. You've a laugh like a boy when you let it go. It doesn't suit the rest of you at all." And then, catching herself being pleased about it, being warmed by it, she frowned and looked crossly down at the book in her lap, put out with her own gladness. "Don't make a thing of it," she muttered. I filed it away, the small vanity of a woman who liked, more than she'd ever admit, to be the one who made the joke land, and who was thrown badly off her stride by any evidence that she'd moved me. It was the first true thing I ever learned about Wren Calloway, as distinct from the first thing I deduced, and there is all the difference in the world between the two. Deduction had told me, that first night on the step, everything about what she did. It took these slow, warm evenings to begin to learn what she was. And the second kind of knowing, I found, was the only kind that had ever mattered, and I had spent my whole armored life mistaking the first kind for it. Over those 3 days, I learned a great many true things, which had almost never happened to me before, because true things about people only surrender themselves to a man who has stopped interrogating and started listening, and I had spent decades doing nothing but interrogate. I learned she had been born in a workhouse, and put out at 12 to a woman named Suki Ford, who ran a small clever crew of card sharps and house thieves out of a lodging in Leeds, and who had taught her the trade the way a master teaches an apprentice, with beatings for a spoiled job and a larger share for a clean one. She told me this without a scrap of self-pity, flatly, as a set of facts about the weather of her life, and the flatness was somehow far worse than weeping would have been, because you do not learn to speak of your own childhood in that even, unmoved voice unless you have had to make it not hurt in order to go on living beside it. "Don't," she said when she saw my face. "Don't do that, the pity. I can't work if you pity me, and I don't want it besides. It was a trade like any trade. Suki fed me and taught me a skill and didn't sell me to worse, which in that house was very nearly kindness. I'm not a tragedy, your grace. I'm a professional. There's a difference, and I'd thank you to remember it." "I don't pity you," I said, and it was true. I was reckoning how much of what I have I came by simply falling out of the right woman into the right cradle, and how little of it I'd have managed if I'd been set down where you were set down. It's not pity. It's something nearer to shame." She looked at me for a long moment at that, and something in her face shifted, and she did not have a quick answer ready, which I was learning was the surest sign I had reached the woman and not one of her masks. I learned, too, and this delighted me more than I can properly say, that she read. Voraciously, hungrily, and entirely in secret, having taught herself her letters as a child off stolen playbills and the flyleaves of books pawned by their owners, spelling out the words by rushlight when Suki's house slept. She had opinions about half the poets on my shelves, strong and unexpected and defended fiercely, and she delivered them with her chin up defiantly, as though daring me to sneer at a thief with views on verse. I did not sneer. I gave her the free run of the library, told Barlow she was to have any book in the house, at any hour, and I began to come upon her there at odd, unlikely times, curled small in the great wing chair by the cold hearth with a single candle guttering low, and a volume held close to catch the last of its light, so lost in the reading that she did not hear me come in. And each time I found her so, something happened in the middle of my chest that I had long believed had rusted shut. It did not feel like rust giving way. It felt like a window I had nailed up years ago being quietly, painfully forced open, and the cold, clean air of the outside world coming in through it after a very long time. I understood by the third night that I was in real danger, not from Sir Holly's vein, from myself. The iron I had forged so carefully over the ruined place where my wanting had a fault in it now, a hairline crack but spreading, the way a crack in a bell will spread, and the fault had a shape, and the shape was a small, sharp northern woman who could see straight through me to the man beneath and had, for reasons entirely her own, decided partway through not to rob me after all. And then Sir Holly's vein arrived on the fourth day, with his niece and his notes of debt and his soft, patient certainty, and the true performance, the one we had built 3 days to be ready for, began. He came down the drive in a fine carriage in the middle of a gray afternoon, and I stood on my own steps to receive him with Wren at my side, her hand light and settled on my arm as though it had lived there a year, and I felt her go between the carriage door opening and the man stepping down, into a woman I had not yet met among all her selves. Not the sleepless, grieving cousin, not the flat, quick professional. A lady. Well-born, lightly amused, faintly shy in the presence of a great man, entirely and unremarkably at home on the arm of a duke in a hall she had come, 3 weeks before, to burgle. The transformation was so complete and so seamless that for a moment even I half believed it, and I was the one man alive who knew for certain it was false. Sir Holly's was large and soft and slow-moving, with a wide, mild, pleasant face and small eyes that missed nothing whatsoever. I had said he read people nearly as well as I did. I had not, until I watched him climb my steps, fully reckoned what it would mean to turn a man of that kind loose on the woman I had hired to deceive him. He came up smiling, and he took the whole tableau in me, Wren, her hand on my arm, the ease of us, and I watched him revise his entire campaign in the space of that smile, watched the disappointment and the recalculation flicker once behind the small eyes and vanish. "And this," he said, taking my hand warmly in both of his soft ones, "must be the lady I have heard the most tantalizing whispers of. Your Grace, you have been secretive. One hears there's a young woman at Harrowgate and no more than that, no name, no family, no announcement. A man begins to wonder." He turned the mild, wide face upon Wren, and the small eyes settled. "You must forgive an old man his curiosity, my dear." "Miss Verena Ashford," I said, "my intended." I felt no tremor at all in the hand upon my arm. Wren gave Sir Holly's her own hand to bow over, and said something warm and graceful and just a little shy, and greeted Marguerite, a pale, pretty, unhappy girl who plainly wanted no part of any of this and was here entirely on her uncle's engine, with a kindness that seemed wholly unforced. And she did it all so perfectly, wove herself so completely into the fabric of a great house and an ancient name, that I understood with a lurch how good she truly was, better even than I had credited, and I felt the first cold breath of how much I now had riding on that goodness holding. Sir Holly's kissed her hand, and did not quite let it go as soon as he ought to have, and over the top of that courtesy I watched him begin, patiently, mildly, smilingly, to dig. "Ashford," he said, as though savoring it, as we went into the fire and the tea. "Ashford, now where would your people sit, my dear? I flatter myself I know most of the good families north of the Trent, and one or two south of it besides. There are Ashfords in Northumberland, Sir Gerald's line. Would those be your—" "No relation, I'm sorry to say," Wren answered, easy as breathing, warming her hands at my fire. "Ours is a much quieter branch. Westmoreland and dwindling. I'm afraid my grandfather was the last of us to cut any figure at all, and he did most of his figure-cutting at cards, which is why there's so little left of the family and none of the fortune." A small, rueful smile, perfectly judged, the smile of a well-bred girl making light of respectable decline. "I'm the poor relation here entirely, Sir Holly's. His Grace is marrying a great deal of pedigree and no money whatever, and I've told him he's a fool for it, but he won't be told." It was masterly. She had heard the shape of his question place her, catch her out on a family she can't possibly know from the inside, and she had answered it by placing herself just out of reach, in a branch too minor and too far and too ruined to be readily checked, and she had wrapped the whole evasion in a charming, disarming self-deprecation that made it feel not like offense but like a confidence. Sir Holly smiled and nodded and filed it away, and moved his patient siege one quiet foot forward, and I understood that this smiling, tea-drinking interrogation was going to go on, cast after cast after cast, for the whole of the week. And it did. He was tireless, and he was clever, and he was never once anything but mild. Over 3 days he laid his net down over her a strand at a time. Where had she come out, and in what year? For surely a face like hers he'd have remembered. She had come out very quietly in York, a poor season, the year of her father's last illness. No, he'd not have been there, no one had been there, it was a sad small affair. Who were her people's connections, her godparents, the friends of her girlhood? All named, all consistent, all just obscure enough. On the second evening he tried a crueler cast, named a family, the Meridus, warmly, as surely her near cousins, asked after old Lady Meridu's health with every appearance of fond concern. It was a trap. I saw it and my heart stopped. There were no Meridu cousins. If she claimed them, he had her. If she denied a connection she was supposed to have, he had her differently. Wren tilted her head gently and looked sorry to correct so kind a gentleman. I think you must be thinking of the Berkshire Meridus, Sir Holly's, a common confusion. They've the same arms nearly, and half the world muddles us. No connection to us at all, more's the pity. They're far grander. We're the plain northern sort with the same name and none of the acreage. And she turned his trap so smoothly inside out that the man was left actually thanking her for setting him right. And I sat at my own table and watched a master at the very summit of her craft turn a knife aside as though brushing away a fly. And I was prouder of her in that moment than I had ever in my life been of anything I had done myself. But a week is a long time to hold a lie whole against a patient man who has decided there is a seam in it somewhere and means to find it. And I began to see the cost of it on her when we were alone. For each night, when the tea was cleared and Marguerite had drooped her unhappy way up to bed, and Sir Holly's had bowed his soft good night, Wren came to me in the library to report on the day's fencing and to plan the next, and each night the well-born lady fell away at the door like a cloak dropped from tired shoulders, and left behind her the woman, quicker, flatter, northern, and drawn thinner every evening than the last. I found I lived for that hour. The hour of the true face, given to me and to no one else in the house, the one room in Harrowgate where Wren Calloway did not have to be anybody at all. "He nearly had me tonight," she said, on the fifth night, dropping into the wing chair by the dead hearth with not one scrap of the grace she wore all day. "The business about the hymn," he came back to it, "did you notice? The hymn your make-believe aunt was fond of. He's circling something. He doesn't know what yet. But he can smell that something in my story doesn't sit true, and he's a patient old spider, and he'll keep circling till he finds the loose thread." "You turned it beautifully," I said. "You turn everything beautifully. I've watched you for 5 days do the impossible and do it smiling." "I always turn it beautifully. That's not the point." She pressed the heels of her hands hard against her closed eyes, and for a moment in the low light she looked very young and very tired. "The point is he keeps coming back to the same 3 days of a life I made up out of nothing, worrying at them like a dog at a bone. And a made-up life has no depth to it, your grace. You can furnish the front rooms, but there's nothing behind the doors, and a man who keeps opening doors will come at last to an empty one." She let her hands fall. "I've run longer cons than this, months some of them, and I was calmer through every one of them than I am through this single week. I don't understand it." "Understand what?" She was quiet. The fire was out. Somewhere the great clock told the hour into the dark of the house. "Why, this one frightens me," she said at last, not looking at me, looking instead at the cold grate. "Why my hands aren't steady over it. In the ordinary way of the work I don't care whether a thing comes off. I care, but not in the belly. If a con falls through, I cut and I run, and there's another mark by the next new moon. It's whether it comes and goes. But this one," she stopped. Her jaw worked. And then she made herself say it, plainly, the way I was learning she made herself say all the truest and most costly things. "This one I want to win. For you. Not for the purse, for you. And the wanting of it makes my hands shake, and shaking hands get caught, and I've kept myself alive 20 years by keeping my hands still and my heart out of the work entirely, and you've—" a short, unhappy breath that was almost a laugh. "You've ruined me, your grace. I was a very good thief, right up, until the moment I started to care what you thought of me." And she looked up from the cold hearth and met my eyes, and the whole of her true face was open. No performance in it anywhere, no lady, no professional, no mask of any kind, only the woman, tired and honest and afraid. And I understood, with a certainty that went through me like cold water, that we had both of us stopped acting somewhere back among those 3 days in the garden and the library. and had only just this moment, in the dark of the dead fire, admitted to having noticed. I should have said something wise and gentle to her then across that dead hearth. Something careful, something that kept the door of the bargain safely shut. What I said instead was the plain truth, because she had spent a week teaching me, without ever meaning to teach me this, how a plain truth is said. I have not thought well of anyone in a very long time, I said. I stopped, years ago, deliberately, because thinking well of people had cost me more than I could afford to lose twice. I built the iron precisely so that I would never again make the mistake of believing in someone. And then a thief came to rob me and let me catch her, and stayed. And I find I think better of her than of any soul I know. I am entirely aware of how absurd that is, Miss Calloway. I have said it over to myself 100 times this week in exactly those words. You are besotted with the woman who came to steal your silver, and I do not care. The absurdity does not move me at all. It is simply the truth, and I've grown fond of telling the truth this week. You taught me the habit. She stared at me, and then she shook her head hard and looked away, as though I'd struck her rather than praised her. Don't, she said low. Don't be kind to me about it, anything but that. I came here to rob you. I want you to keep that in the front of your mind, Your Grace, because you seem to keep setting it down. I picked your house off a list. I forged a dead woman's blood into my own. I stood in your gallery the third night pricing your grandmother's portraits for the fence. I am, right now, tonight, exactly the thing you named on the front step. Don't polish me into something I'm not just because I've a quick tongue and I've read a few of your poets. It's not fair, and it's not safe, and one of us has to keep his head. You are the thing I named on the step, I agreed. And you are also every true thing I've learned since, and it is the second part I've fallen in love with, and the first part I've stopped minding, because the first part is only what the world made of a workhouse girl of 12, and the second part is what she made of herself in spite of it, in the dark, by rushlight, with stolen books. I had not planned to say the word love. It arrived on its own, the way the laugh had arrived that night in the library, up and out, and past the iron before the iron could close on it. And having said it once, I found I could not regret it. I have spent my whole life making exact sense of every person who came near me, and it has left me perfectly, expertly, comfortably alone. You are the first human being in 20 years I have not been able to reduce to a tidy sum of motives. You are the one problem in my life I cannot solve, and I have discovered this week that I would infinitely rather be baffled by you until I die than be certain of anyone else for the rest of my days. For a long moment she did not move at all. The dark was thick around the two of us and the one low candle. When she spoke at last, her voice was not steady. This wasn't in the terms, she said. No, I said, it was not. At the week's end I take the purse and I go. That was the whole of the bargain. You caught the thief, you used her, you paid her fair, you opened the door, clean, sensible, no one the worse. She was gripping the arms of the chair. If you turn it into if this becomes a real thing and then it goes wrong, the way real things always in the end go wrong, then I've nowhere left to run to. Do you see? A con I can always walk out of. I've walked out of 100. But a heart I've handed over that I couldn't walk out of, and if it broke I'd have nothing, not even the running, because you'd have taken the running from me too. Her eyes were bright and fierce in the candlelight. You're asking me to set down the one thing that's kept me alive my whole life, which is being able always at any moment to leave. And I understood her. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me in my life, and it was, underneath, a refusal, and I made myself hear it as a refusal and accept it because that too she had taught me. You do not con a person into staying. The whole vile art of the world she'd been raised in was the art of making people want what you needed them to want. I would not do that to her. Not that, not with this. Then the terms stand, I said, and I made my voice steady for her sake, though it cost me. At the week's end, the purse and the door open, and I'll open it myself. No debt, no claim, no word from me to hold you. I'll not say the word again, Wren, I give you my hand on it. She nodded once and looked back at the cold grate, and neither of us believed for a moment that the terms would hold, and neither of us was cruel enough to say so aloud. They held for one more day. On the sixth day it all came apart, and it came apart, as these things always do, not through Sir Holly's veins patient month-long spider circling, which for all its craft never did find the seam, but through a single stroke of plain, flat, catastrophic luck that no foresight in the world could have armored us against. There was a dinner, a large one. The neighborhood invited, 40 at the table, the good families for miles brought in under the chandeliers, and the false engagement to be all but formally acknowledged before them, so that when Sir Holly's went home it would be as a thing the whole county had witnessed and no denial could ever unpick. It was Wren's own strategy, and a sound one. Make it public, make it witnessed, make it too widely known to walk back. We had built the whole week toward this night. And among the guests, arriving late and entirely unlooked for, brought along on the arm of a neighboring viscount whose house she happened to be passing through, was a woman I had not laid eyes on in 3 years, and had prayed nightly never to lay eyes on again. Lady Sybil, married now and a viscountess, and traveling through the county on her way to somewhere that did not matter, silver-laughing still. She came into my hall on the viscount's arm in a gown the color of frost, and I felt the old cold hand close on the back of my neck, and I thought only, at first, of myself, of getting through an evening in the same rooms as the woman who had made me iron. I did not think of the danger to Wren. I did not think of it until it was already happening, until Sybil, seated across the wide table, let her bright restless gaze travel down the board and snag, and stop, and sharpen, upon the face of my intended. I saw the frown gather. I saw it deepen from puzzlement toward memory, and my blood turned to water in me, because Lady Sybil, whatever else she was, had one genuine and terrible gift. She never in her life forgot a face. "Forgive me," she said into a lull in the talk in that clear carrying voice that had once been the whole music of my ruin, "but surely we have met. I never forget a face, and yours," she smiled, tilting her head, hunting it down with evident pleasure. "Bath, 2 summers past. Yes, I'm nearly certain of it. You were companion to old Mrs. Fenwick, were you not, the deaf one at the pump room? The poor creature who lost all her jewels, every stone she owned, to some clever servant she'd been fool enough to trust. Such a dreadful scandal. It was the talk of the season." The smile widened, delighted with its own memory. "But how odd to find you here, my dear, and so very grandly placed. However did Mrs. Fenwick's companion come to be the future Duchess of Harrowgate?" The table went entirely still. 40 faces turned, and I watched Sir Holly's vain, soft, mild, pleasant face swing slowly toward Wren with the terrible patient interest of a man who has been digging in the wrong field for a week, and has just been handed, by a stranger's idle malice, a map with the spot marked upon it in red. I have thought in all the years since about the several things I might have done in that frozen instant. I might have laughed it off, declared a case of mistaken identity, deployed the whole weight of my rank and my iron reputation to freeze Lady Sybil out and make her doubt her own certainty before the county. Perhaps it would even have served. I was a duke in my own hall, and she was a viscountess passing through, and the ground was mine. I will never know whether it would have served, because I never got the chance to try it. Because Wren Calloway did the one thing in all the world I had never once, in a week of studying her more closely than I had ever studied anything, seen her do or imagined her capable of doing. She told the truth. She set down her glass unhurried, and she looked around at the 40 turned and staring faces, at Sir Holly's with his soft mouth already opening, at Lady Sybil bright with malice, at the whole assembled quality of the county. And she said in her own voice, the flat clear north of it plain and unashamed for every soul at that table to hear, "Her ladyship is quite right. My name is not Verena Ashford. I have no grey tan in this family, nor any drop of its blood in me. I came to Harrowgate a fortnight ago under a false name and a forged letter, and I have deceived every one of you who has been kind enough to sit at this table, and I am sorry for it, more sorry than I can make you believe, which is a just punishment for a liar, that when at last she tells the truth, no one is obliged to credit it. The silence was absolute. I could not breathe. Down the whole length of the table not a fork moved. "His Grace," she went on, and now her voice did tremble just once and she mastered it, "owes you all an explanation, and I will not stand here and let him give it, because the fault is mine entire and none of it his. So hear it from the one who earned it. I am a thief. That is my trade and has been since I was a child, and I came to this house to rob it. His Grace saw through me on the very first night, of course he did. He is exactly the man you all believe him to be, and I am exactly the sort of clever nothing who thought she could fool him. He caught me the first hour, and instead of handing me to the magistrate as I richly deserved and fully expected, he showed me a mercy I had not earned and could never repay, and did not, God forgive me, know how to answer except by staying to try." She stood and put her napkin on the table with a steady hand. "You need not send for the constable, Sir Hollies. I'll not make you chase me across the county. I'll gather my things and be gone within the hour, and you may all go home and tell the tale as it deserves to be told. But you'll tell it true, that the Duke of Harrowgate was the one man at this table too honest to be the villain of it. The only villain here is leaving of her own accord." And she turned, and she walked the whole length of that long, silent, starring room with her head up and her back straight and her eyes forward, out through the double doors and into the dark of the hall, having thrown away, with both hands, the one thing she had told me not 2 nights before she could never bear to lose. Her escape, her clean walking out, her purse and her freedom and her unblemished name, all of it, flung down on my dining table to buy back the good name of a man who had hired her to lie. Which is the one thing, the single solitary thing, that no confidence artist in the history of the trade has ever done, because it is the exact and total opposite of the entire trade, which exists to save the self at any cost and let the mark bear the ruin. And watching her go, I understood at last, with perfect clarity, the thing she had been too frightened her whole life to let herself have. And I understood just as clearly, precisely what I would be for the whole of the rest of my days, if I sat at that table and let iron win and let her walk through that door. I do not remember rising. I am told I overturned my chair. I remember only that I caught her in the dark of the hall, at the very foot of the great staircase, and caught her hand, the same hand I had caught in the gallery on the first night, when I named her a thief and she named me not cruel, and she turned, and her true face in the shadow was wet and furious and terrified all at once. "Let me go," she said. "You heard her. You heard me. I've just handed you back your good sensible ending on a plate, the thief exposed, the Duke blameless, the county on your side to a man. It's the finest piece of work I've ever done, and it's the last honest thing I'll ever be able to give you, so for God's sake take it and let me go." "I don't want it," I said. "You have to want it. It's the sensible." "I have been sensible my entire life," I said, and I did not let go of her hand, and being sensible made me the loneliest man in the north of England. I am finished being sensible, Wren. I am done with it forever, as of about a minute ago. You stood up in a room full of the people whose opinion is supposed to be my whole world, and you told them the one truth that could save my name and damn yourself, and you did it to spare me, you, who have spared no one, who were taught from the age of 12 that sparing people is how you starve. That is the least sensible thing I have ever seen a human being do, and it is the most honest. And I will not let you walk out of my house into the dark to punish yourself for a trade you were sold into as a child, when you have just proved, in front of 40 witnesses, that you are the most honest person I have ever known." Behind us, through the doors, I could hear the dining room coming back to life, Sir Hollies's soft, urgent voice, Lady Sybil's bright one, the scandal already lifting its wings to fly out over the whole county by morning. Let it fly. I had never in my life cared less for anything. "They'll ruin you," she whispered. "Don't you understand what she's handed them? A duke who was gulled by a thief so completely he nearly married her. You'll be the joke of every drawing room from here to London." "Then I'll be a joke," I said, and I'll be a joke in the best company I've ever kept for the first time in my whole iron life. Wren, listen to me. I'm not holding your hand to keep you. You're free. You were always free. The door is there, and I'll open it myself this second if you tell me to, and I'll never say one word against you anywhere on this earth. I'm holding your hand to ask you. That's all. The asking. You told me 2 nights ago that you couldn't let this be real because you'd have nowhere left to run to. So I'm asking you to stop running. Not into another part. Not into a role, not the lady, not the cousin, not anyone you have to be. Stay as yourself, Wren Calloway, thief, reader of poets, the one soul in 20 years who ever looked at me and saw the actual man. And let this house be the one place in the whole world you never, ever have to leave. She was crying now, openly, the tears running down and her jaw set hard against them, and she shook her head, but she did not pull her hand from mine. I'm not good, she said, and it came out cracked. You keep making me into something. I'll never be a proper duchess. I'll shame you at every dinner. I'll count the exits in every room I stand in for the rest of my life. I won't be able to stop. It's bred into me too deep. I don't know how to be loved. Do you understand that? I've never once in my life been loved without there being a bill for it at the end. I don't know how to take a kind thing and not spend the whole time waiting for the reckoning. Then I'll show you there's no reckoning, I said. For as long as it takes. If it takes 20 years, I have 20 years, and I have a very large and very empty house, and as of tonight I have absolutely nothing sensible left to do with either of them. I lifted her hand, the caught hand, and I held it against my chest so she could feel that the iron-eyed Duke's heart was going like a boy's. Count every exit in every room for the rest of your life if you must. I don't mind. I'll stand between you and the door as long as you like, not to keep you in, never that, only so that every single time you look for the way out, the first thing you'll see is me, still here, still glad, still choosing it. Stay, Wren. Not for the terms. There are no terms. There never have to be terms again. Just stay. And she looked at me for a long, long moment in the dark at the foot of the stairs, looked at me the way she had looked at me in the gallery on that first night when she chose to let the mask drop rather than run, and I watched her make the single hardest calculation of her whole hard life. Not this time how to get out, but whether, after 20 guarded years, she was allowed to stop wanting to. Whether a good thing could be, against all the evidence her life had ever shown her, simply given and simply kept. I'll never stop checking the locks, she said at last, very quietly. A warning, a last honest chance for me to be sensible. Good, I said. It's a great house. Somebody ought to. And she made a sound that was half a sob and half, astonishingly, that laugh of hers, the real one, the one that came up out of a person before they could stop it, wet and broken and utterly amazed at itself. And she did not let go of my hand. And that, in the end, when everything else had been said, was the whole of her answer. The scandal came, of course, exactly as she had promised it would. Sir Holly's Vane withdrew his unhappy niece within the hour, and out of pure spite at a lever slipped from his grasp, called in every last note of my father's debt at once. And for a full season Harrowgate was the byword of 3 counties, the great house where the famous iron-eyed Duke had been so thoroughly and completely gulled by a common thief that he had gone and married her. They had it precisely backward, which was the part that always secretly pleased me most. I had not been gulled. I had, for the first and only time in the whole of my guarded life, been seen straight through, past the iron and the rank and the reputation, down to the lonely man at the bottom of it. And I had, at the very last possible moment, the sense to hold on to the one person on earth who had managed to do it. We paid Sir Holly's notes down over 4 hard, frightening, wonderful years, Wren managing the accounts of the whole estate with a sharp, shrewd, fearless competence that would, I often told her, have made her the terror of the North had she stayed on the wrong side of the law. She did not shame me at a single dinner. She counted the exits in every room, as she'd sworn she would for the rest of her life. I would catch her at it sometimes, that old flat professional sweep of the eye taking the inventory of a strange drawing-room, and I never once minded, and slowly, over the first winter and more of the second, She stopped flinching when I was kind to her, though it took a great deal longer than that for her to stop bracing, somewhere deep down, for the bill. I did not mind the wait. I had told her I had 20 years. It turned out I had rather more. I am an old man now, and I have been married the better part of a lifetime to the woman who came into my house to rob me and stayed to save me, and who still, on her worst nights, all these long years on, reaches across in the dark to lay a hand on my chest and be sure I am there, be sure I have not in the night quietly proved to be a thing too good to have been let to keep. I take her hand every single time. I caught it in a gallery, and I caught it again at the foot of a staircase, and I have gone on catching it, morning and night, for a lifetime, and I will tell you now the one truest thing I know. I, who spent the best years of my youth learning to detect every lie a human face is capable of telling. The finest liar I ever met in my life never once, from the first hour to the last, lied to me about the only thing that ever mattered. She told me she was not good, and she was wrong. She told me she would spend her whole life waiting for the reckoning, the bill, the price at the bottom of the page. There was never any bill. There was only a woman who came in out of the cold gray north to take everything I owned, and who gave me instead the one thing I had lost so long ago I had forgotten it even had a name. And a man just foolish enough at the very last to overturn his chair and drop the iron and stop being sensible and simply be glad.